What's up, and welcome to another beautiful episode of Scene Selection, and we have a good one today. If you're new to the channel and this is your first video, you should know that our main event is a show called Battle Royale. Now, it hasn't exactly popped up in a bit, but it's definitely not over with, and it, like most other versus shows on this site, was directly inspired by Rooster Teeth's Death Battle. A show with over 140 episodes across 8 seasons that's been going for 10 years now, and most of the members of Crossover X have been watching since the very beginning, including myself, so we all want to show our appreciation to this massive titan of the internet by sharing our favorite episodes. But as for me specifically, there's a bit of a problem. See, on my own channel, I actually already talked about my favorite episodes, or top 5 favorite episodes, fairly recently, so I don't have anything too new to say on this topic. Not to worry though, because there are still a couple episodes that really stick out to me and almost made my list, so why not talk about them here? First up is Wolverine vs. Ryden. Okay, I know Metal Gear only has 2 episodes in Death Battle to go off of, but I can't think of a single franchise in the show that has a better streak of just being amazing. And while the episode may not have been better than Snake vs. Sam Fisher, no episode can accomplish that, it still surpassed expectations. Somehow, Wiz and Boomstick were yet again, twice in a row, able to explain Metal Gear lore in an understandable way. That's a feat on its own, but they also made it pretty entertaining with the jokes, which are actually pretty good in this episode too. As for its personal effect on me, this episode actually came out very early on in my Versus career. Like, before I even kicked off my own first Versus show, and it taught me a few lessons to bring into it. Like how healing factors aren't everything, and if the user's opponent can overpower it and outpace it with superior speed and strength, then the healing factor doesn't matter. Or comparing the different attributes of objects in different verses to figure out how things would play out in battle, like comparing Raiden's Murasama to Misty Storm's Vibranium to determine if Raiden's sword could cut through Wolverine's skeleton. And then we come to the fight, which is one of the most action-packed, fillerless, well-choreographed fights of the entire series. These two just go at it. There are no breaks as they throw banter at each other while swinging, and they just make each other angrier and angrier as the fight goes on until eventually they both end up in a berserker rage. And that finishing blow, man, that's still one of my favorite deaths in the entire show. Decapitating Wolverine, slicing his head hundreds of times while it's in the air, and then kicking it to pieces before it even has a chance to start falling to the ground? More of this, please. And don't even get me started on that bit where Wolverine was still fighting with the Murasama stuck in him. Top it all off with some nice voice acting and great music choice, and voila! You got a beautiful episode. But that's not all. There's one more fantastic episode I want to talk about, one I've actually wanted to publicly apologize to for a while now. Ratchet and Clank vs. Jak and Daxter. My extreme dislike of this episode when it first came out was purely based on me being a Jak and Daxter fanboy and not knowing anything about Ratchet and Clank. And while I still don't know much about Ratchet and Clank since I've only played the reboot at this point, I can still see why they win. Now, don't get me wrong, I still have a couple gripes with this episode, but they're definitely reasonable ones, mainly everything involving Daxter. Not that I think it would change the outcome or anything, but they left out Dark Daxter and overall made Daxter out to be a lot more useless than he actually is. And then there's his not great casting in the animation. I think Todd Abercorn plays him here, and while I adore Todd Abercorn in his work, especially as Keroro and Sergeant Frog, a good Daxter he most certainly is not. It sounds like he's choking and gasping for breath the entire fight. Other than those gripes though, the episode is absolutely fantastic. The research is interesting and entertaining, and the fight scene is especially pretty to watch and super creative as it uses a ton of their different weapons. Like, I see everyone gush about how Link vs. Cloud 2 used a ton of stuff from each character's arsenal, but they don't talk about Jak vs. Ratchet. That thing went crazy. So yes, overall a big apology to this episode. You're super accurate and entertaining, the fight scene is incredible, and despite your mishaps involving the orange lightning, you are a great episode.
I've been watching Death Battle since late Season 1. I grew up watching it and saw the show change and evolve over the course of a decade. My favourite changed as new episodes continued to come out. For a while it was Goku vs Superman, then Deadpool vs Deathstroke, and then it was Iron Man vs Lex for a solid 3 years. It didn't change for a while, and I didn't expect them to ever top it for me, but my newest favourite ended up being one of the episodes to release the closest to Tony vs Lex, that being Solid Snake vs Sam Fisher. I could gush for hours about how the analysis is good and break down each and every scene of the fight, but I gotta keep this segment at a reasonable length, so I'll just tackle the biggest reason, how the episode tells a story. A lot of my favourites like Jack vs Afro, Tony vs Lex, and Yoda vs Mickey do this, but Snake vs Sam does it the best in my eyes. It feels like it's more than just a death battle animation. It feels like an actual crossover between Metal Gear and Splinter Cell. It has an inherent advantage over episodes like Jack vs Afro and Yoda vs Mickey just by being a Season 2 episode. Back then, the 3D fights were generally longer, with this one in particular clocking in over 6 minutes, about double what we usually get nowadays. So the setup and story were able to be further fleshed out without disrupting the action. Snake and Sam encounter each other on the same mission, believing each other to be the enemy. A simple yet effective setup, though it means that with characters like these who focus on stealth and carrying out their missions efficiently, they're not going to be stopping to banter with each other. That's where Grim and Otacon come in, adding a whole new layer to the fight as well as a lot more opportunity for character interactions. Otacon even gets a cool moment at the end. Not bad for a character that they bully in the analysis. Speaking of the end, that is why this episode takes the title of my favourite. The fight up until now had been amazing, but the last act is on a whole other level. Otacon shuts Grim down and Sam follows Snake into a dark room as the lights are sabotaged. Snake appears behind him and we get the most iconic lines from Metal Gear. Probably, I haven't played these games, leave me alone. It all culminates in the lights turning back on, Snake disarming Sam of his gun, and both of them getting ready for their final knife fight. This is ultimately the moment that puts it above Tony vs Lex for me. I think that episode had the best dialogue of the series, but Snake vs Sam is able to conclude its fight and story with no words at all. A down-to-earth, close-quarters knife fight. Their partners can no longer help them and the rest of their gear is either lost or broken. It all just comes down to this, a test of skill that they both know will end with only one of them walking out alive. And they're both about to make damn sure that they're either going to be the sole survivor or go down swinging. The music that plays here is perfect too. I genuinely thought Divine Identity was a song from the Metal Gear soundtrack for the longest time. That's how well it fits. This episode obviously isn't flawless, and it does show its age in a few areas of the animation, but I don't care, this is still the complete package for me. It managed to get me so invested in characters I barely even knew, and still don't to this day, which is a feat more impressive than anything that any other episode's ever pulled off. It's not something that Death Battle's come close to topping for me since its release, but I'm hopeful they will in the future. Like I said before, I could gush about this episode for way longer, but I still gotta let other people talk about their episodes, so I'll pass it over to someone else for now.
Man, choosing a favorite Death Battle episode for this scene selection episode is going to be kinda difficult. There's so many I can choose from, like the fast-paced intense Samurai Jack vs Afro Samurai, to the shockingly amazing and even uplifting All Might vs Might guy. But in the end, there's only one episode I can truly call my all-time favorite. And of all the episodes this show has done, I can safely say that episode is none other than Power Rangers vs Voltron. I'll make this brief. This fight is simply everything I want to see in an episode like this. The fast-paced action, the heavy and impactful hits that leave the very ground they stand on full of debris, the amazing visuals. Okay, yeah, both the Voltron pilots and the Rangers themselves don't look the greatest, but to be fair, they aren't the main focus of this animation, as the focus is more on the colorful combining robots themselves. And of course, the actual combat itself. This fight just feels like it's got non-stop hard-hitting action all throughout, and honestly, it feels like either of these characters could have won. There was even a moment where Voltron was on the ropes and was on the verge of losing, with even the Voltron Force losing one of their members in the moment. And I remember on my first viewing that I thought this was going to be where the fight was going to end, only for Pidge's reckless nature to come in clutch and get the Voltron Force out of their sticky situation, all with just enough energy to overwhelm the Megazord and land that glorious final blow. Now that's how you end a fight with an explosion death right there. Along with that, I just love the sheer variety in the combat here. It felt like everything got used, from Voltron's spinning laser blades to even the freezing ability from the Megazord's Mastodon shield. Even the Power Sword, when being summoned, managed to hit the Voltron Force before it even landed in the hands of the Megazord. I don't know why, but I always found that moment pretty badass. And all of this is complemented by what I think is one of the best original instrumental tracks used in a death battle fight. Brandon Yates' Stronger Together felt like the perfect blend of elements from Voltron's epic theme and elements of the guitar shredding goodness of the original Mighty Morphin Power Rangers theme, all forming into an original track that I can still rock out to this day. And to think, this came up before original fight tracks became as commonplace as they are now. Like I said, the action here just feels non-stop and I still get hyped watching it no matter how many times I watch this fight. And there's a damn good reason this episode is as hype as it is. Basically, this episode was planned to be a season finale, specifically for the infamous 3rd season. And honestly, it makes a lot of sense as to why it'd be a fitting finale in retrospect. Like with Goku vs Superman and Pokemon vs Digimon, this was a huge request that was a long time coming, and the matchup itself, seeing as it's a fight between two giant destructive robots, would be perfect to end the season with. But seeing as the crew wanted to do this fight justice, they had to delay it and replace the finale with Deadpool vs Pinkie Pie at the last minute. Though to be fair, despite it not being that fitting of a finale, I still think it's a better overall episode than Thanos vs Darkseid. And honestly, with how this episode turned out, I am still thankful to this day that they didn't try to rush this episode out or push out in a state where it just wasn't ready yet. They knew they had something special cooking here, and they made sure to get everything right with this amazing battle, even if it means not making it the Season 3 finale or even the Season 4 premiere. Honestly, there's just so much I can talk about with this episode, like the Megazord animating exactly as if he had a suit actor in him like in the original show, or the fact that to this day, this episode has one of the largest cast of voice actors in a single episode with a whopping 10 voice actors from all across the internet. But I feel for this episode, I've covered all the bases I can. Sure, it's possible that Death Battle could top this fight in the future, and there have been plenty of episodes that have come really close to topping it. But ever since that fateful day of April 12, 2017, this glorious giant robot fight still stands tall as Death Battle's greatest episode.
You ever just realize my biggest contribution to this channel has been voicing the clone of a magic psychic Jesus fetus and telling them to reword their rules? Crazy. Well, I like to hope I don't introduce myself. Either you know me or you're blessed with ignorance. On the topic of my favorite Death Battle episode, I made it no secret that it's Godzilla vs. Gamera, and as someone with a reputation for going all in with analysis of the shortcomings and successes of Death Battle episodes, I'm going to shelve critical analysis for another time and focus more on just why this episode matters so much to me. I feel like some scene setting needs to be done. Growing up, Godzilla was basically half of what made up my entire childhood, the other half being Transformers. I grew up on the Heisei era, the Showa era, and eventually the Millennium era as well. These films shaped my interests moving forward. Along with that, I had the Gamera trilogy too. Well, I wouldn't actually get to watch the Showa films or Gamera the Brave until much later. And having these films in my head, the moment I got into the verse community back with the original Boba Fett vs. Samus Aran, this was my most wanted matchup. It remains my overall favorite versus matchup, period. These two kaiju were the rivalry that resonated with me the most growing up. GoBots never had the staying power to get its rivalry with Transformers stuck in my head. None of the video game rivalries I grew up with like Mario vs Sonic or Kratos vs Dante struck a chord with me to this extent. And no bitch-ass Marvel vs DC. Then the next time trailer dropped was just Godzilla barely illuminated in the dark before letting out a mighty roar, and I was so hopeful. I was praying it wasn't one of those other popular matches I don't care about. Godzilla vs Evangelion? What's that? Godzilla vs Optimus Prime? Why would you do that? Godzilla vs Nemesis Prime? I didn't even know what Colossal Kaiju Combat was at the time. But then it dropped. Well, actually it got delayed and I didn't get to go to SGC, but fuck off. Godzilla vs Gamera feels like everything I would have ever wanted from the mashup. Well, except that they say Godzilla and Gamera never met when there was a stage production in 1970, but I'm not sure if that was known about in the West at that point. Also, they say Kaiser Ghidorah is Godzilla's arch rival and he's only appeared in the tail end of one movie and is a separate kaiju technically, officially and legally to King Ghidorah, and isn't even his most impressive lifting feat because he's through Heisei made Godzilla who weighs 150,000 tons. And also they say Gamera's official weight is 10,000 tons when his highest official weight is 1,200. Oh god, I love this episode and need to stop being such a dickhead. But seeing Death Battle talk about series that have as much meaning to me as these just feels special. Referencing some of their more iconically weird moments, some of their more obscure weirdness like Fire Rodance thing and the Sega Dreamcast thing. It's hard to explain, but hearing Wiz and Boomstick, the most iconic hosts in the Viz community, just talking about all the facets of Godzilla and Gamera from their films entertains me so much. And the fact that this was done in Season 2 and thus uses music from their series adds to it. I love the Godzilla and Gamera trilogy OSTs, and hearing tracks like Mothra vs Gigan, Godzilla's Rage from G&K, Air Battle from Gamera 3, Gamera Endangered at Mount Fuji from Guardian of the Universe, and even Godzilla's theme from Godzilla Unleashed is a constant joy. It's like a finely tuned nostalgia beam directly into my ears. And despite how the clear favourite of this episode has and always will be Godzilla, Gamera doesn't at all feel like he was shafted or disrespected. They go all in on even his absurdity, his ridiculous feats, so on. That they do imply he's a pedophile, but it's done in song and in a reference to his own goofy Showa theme, and then leads to Wiz giving him respect, which, then leads to Boomstick giving him the same respect, so that's fine. And the fight, while obviously aged and at some points kinda ugly, especially with this Godzilla model, which doesn't look like any particular version of Godzilla I recognize, is just... I love it. It has the most perfect setup you could get. Godzilla shows up, wrecks some shit, Gamera appears to stop him. And there are just so many references that I love. Godzilla destroying all the buildings with his atomic breath likely wasn't intended, but it comes off as similar to the ending scene of Godzilla 2000. Gamera absorbing this fire and shooting it back as a reference to Guardian of the Universe, and also brilliant, because it allows him to eat fire without eating Godzilla's atomic breath, which is not fire. It's done in a way that allows him to use one of his most iconic abilities, even though Godzilla doesn't facilitate that normally. The tail slide is a fucking... love its ear, but that's a fucking great reference to Godzilla vs. Megalon. Gamera's orbital power slam attempt, it's a reference to Guardians of the Universe. It's not shown very well, but the bit of Godzilla fires atomic breath and freefall is meant to call back to Godzilla vs. Hedorah. Gamera losing his arm references Revenge of Iris, the ultimate plasma references Advent of Legion, and the ending is a dual reference to Godzilla Final Wars and Gamera the Brave. God, do I love this death too! Godzilla takes Gamera's arm, which puts things in his favor, but then Gamera fires his ultimate plasma and it completely overwhelms Godzilla. That leads into this fucking incredible shot of Godzilla rising up behind Gamera, blood pissing from all over to show how much he's been really fucked up by that attack. And then Godzilla goes for his finisher, and in a last ditch ever to protect humanity, Gamera goes for his ultimate attack and response, only for Godzilla to launch Gamera in the sky with his blast, crack his shell, and Gamera go boom. Love it. And overall, I love the aesthetic and tone of this fight. The atmospheric nature of the Dark Knight and how it helps allow their bright range attacks pop, and how as Godzilla starts getting more annoyed with Gamera, he brings forth a thunderstorm that, you got rain everywhere now. It just enhances the atmosphere further, especially as the two end up battling in the ocean. It's pretty much the perfect place to end the fight given the characters in question. It feels not only like a proper kaiju battle, but also genuinely awesome. And I mean awesome in the old school sense, as in it fills the viewer with awe. Though admittedly I don't much like how they use Gamera's retreating and analysis by not bringing it up in the analysis, but what can you do? Anyway, I'm going to leave it at that before the next guy hires a hitman to shut me up so they can have their moment to say something.
I think it's only natural for your preferences in death battles to lie with the characters you like, or at least the ones that you find the most interesting. For example, for a while, my most wanted character on Death Battle was Crash Bandicoot, and Crash vs Spyro is now one of my favourite episodes, but I know full well it's not one of their best. Ever since then, my new most wanted character has had a matchup slated for him, but for now, we got something to tide us over with him, and unlike Crash's episode, I'm confident that this is one of their finest. Mickey Mouse finally made his way onto Death Battle, finally putting an end to those worries that he was completely banned from the show, and it was glorious. The biggest worry about Mickey on Death Battle was that he would basically be made out to be the South Park version of Mickey, despite being a likeable character who could stand on his own without needing to be a personified version of Disney's corrupt business practices. In fact, I would say that this is one of the most respectful episodes of the series, with both characters having a mutual respect for one another that carries through the whole animation, making it incredibly unique. I know this was not the first episode to do this, All Might vs. Might Guy did something similar, but Yoda vs. Mickey pulls it off in such a perfect way. They don't just throw compliments each other's way. Yoda comments on Mickey's proficiency, while Mickey retorts with playful jabs. About 2/3 into the animation, however, Yoda impressively gets some character development without it feeling forced or rushed. From here, Yoda talks down to Mickey, while Mickey, no longer receiving any positive word from his opposition, finally gets serious. It's at this point that they're both taking this far more seriously, and pull out all the stops. It feels like such a natural evolution. Their moods don't swing immediately or anything. I love episodes that are able to build tension and pace themselves. It's why I love Power Rangers vs Voltron and Carnage vs Lucy so much. The way they're written is just the cherry on top of some of the best hand-to-hand combat the Source Filmmaker team has given us, one of my favourite tracks in the show's history, and an analysis that really felt like a return to form. For a while, Death Battle felt less like character analysis, and more like just stat analysis. But with the newest season, they thankfully started actually talking about the characters' accomplishments, and their personality traits properly again. It's made this season a major improvement over the previous one. I'll admit, Mickey finally being on Death Battle likely contributed to some recency bias here, but much to my surprise, my opinion hasn't wavered even slightly. I still consider this to be one of the most well-rounded death battle episodes in the areas that interest me most. I appreciate the versus aspects of versus, but I honestly find the character interactions far more interesting. It's why some of the episodes that have the better choreography don't quite match this one for me. This episode had every possibility to be a train wreck for a fan of Mickey like myself, but they did him so respectfully, and I'm so happy about it. Fingers crossed that when they hopefully do Mickey vs. Bug someday, they stay out of this pitfall, and deliver a new episode that I can call my favourite.
Not gonna lie, Wiz. I owe a lot to Death Battle. Were it not for them, I would never have met the vast majority of the people I call friends today. And while obviously not everything that I've been through since being involved in the Versus scene has been great, I like to think that at this point, I'm happy with the person I am today. And I have a semi-silly online nerd culture show to thank for it. Basically, all of this is to say that picking a favorite death battle has resulted in a number of other answers for me over my history with the show. For a while, my answer would have been Balrog vs. TJ, and it's definitely still one of my top personal picks alongside Goro vs. Machamp, Saberwolf vs. John Talbane, and Roshi vs. Jiraiya. But there's one that stands uncontested as my top pick. And not to say that it's definitely the best, but well.
I'll accept your unconditional surrender now.
Sorry, Marvel Infinite. As much as people seem to be coming around to you in recent memory, your entire antagonist setup was done more interestingly by a web show starring a pharmacist and trailer trash. And we didn't even need to pay for half of it as DLC. Anyway, I digress. Ultron vs. Sigma is an indisputably top-tier episode. The research was all pretty good, and the writing was spot on and very snappy. I especially liked how they laid out the verdict, spelling out in no uncertain terms for veterans and casuals alike how many areas Ultron dominated in. Even the jokes, which tend to be fairly hit or miss for me in Death Battle episodes, all landed in this one. Ultron pulling a Johnny Bravo mid-analysis killed me during my first viewing. The editing was pretty solid as well, making your research portions visually appealing without relying on sound effects and all that to grab attention. But any Death Battle fan will tell you that no episode can truly be great without a solid animation, and Ultron v Sigma delivers on that in spades. The visual styles of the sprites match perfectly, and the settings that make up the backgrounds all sync up with the action too. The choreography is energetic and fast-paced, making full use of both Ultron and Sigma's abilities, while perfectly keeping them neck and neck in the physical battle so it wasn't clear who was winning. The sound design was excellent, even standing as better than some of the show's more recent highlights. The voice acting suited both fighters quite well, and the delivery of their lines was A+ material. Even now when I rewatch this and hear, "You're mine," I get excited chills. And then, of course, there's Brandon Yates absolutely f***ing it up on the soundtrack with his stellar work on Infection Perfection. I slightly prefer the fight version compared to the public version, but it's undeniably great no matter which version you're listening to. It complements the animation so perfectly, with the music syncing up with a lot of the action beats to add to the intensity. And I'm a huge sucker for death battles that have unconventional endings in combat. So capping the battle off with the hacking duel between Ultron's AI and the Sigma virus was climactic in a special way that most straightforward brawls just can't match. It's akin to Roshi vs. Jiraiya's finisher in that regard. And anytime I'm comparing something to that episode in a positive way, that's how you know it's good. I'm not going to say that it's the best episode Death Battle has ever put out, and it has a lot of close competition for my #1 spot, but it'll take a really special match to oust this from the top of the pile for me.
There are some really good death battles. Some of my favorites that might not be highlighted by others are Chuck Norris vs. Seigata Sanshiro, Scrooge McDuck vs. Shovel Knight, Shredder vs. Silver Samurai, Fox McCloud vs. Bucky O'Hare, and Smokey vs. McGruff. I suppose I like somewhat obscure or offbeat characters being highlighted, as well as animations that are unique in some way. My second place of all time is Terminator vs. RoboCop, because I love both film series a lot. Well, I like the first two Terminators, and the first RoboCop is my favorite movie ever. RoboCop 2 is okay, RoboCop 3 is whatever, but yeah, it's a really good episode. But one episode edges it out for me. He-Man vs. Lion-O is really underrated. The animation is nice, the humor is good, and generally not totally cringe, coming mostly from just finding absurd things about the characters and their abilities and feats. I pick it over Terminator vs. RoboCop just about because I think the animation has aged better. That one had a lot of good moments, but it's pretty evident it's one of Torian's earlier animations. But getting back to He-Man vs. Lion-O, it has everything I like about Death Battle at its best, as well as being a good matchup in general. It's a legacy match that people wanted to see for years. It has great character interactions. The fight animation is good, in both general quality and the use of their abilities and arsenal. And like I said, it uses the type of humor Death Battle can have very well. And as far as I can tell, the result is still accurate. I mean, He-Man is pretty strong. It also uses 80s cartoons, which I think can wield interesting results in general, given that they have a lot of superhero-type characters, but you don't necessarily have to deal with Marvel or DC scaling. I mean, I know they both met Superman, but still. I wouldn't mind more of these types of characters in general.
Death Battle is a series that means a lot to me. I'm sure by now you have heard or will hear everyone sharing their sentiments towards the series. Not only do I have the show to indirectly thank for being a caveat for me meeting some of my best friends, but the show also serves to introduce me to a lot of new series and characters. Of course, it's always exciting to see one of your favorite characters get announced for the show. Death Battle reveals are kinda like Smash reveals in a way, and from the moment the episode I would call my favorite was announced, the characters and hype surrounding the episode culminated into a death battle that has reigned as my favorite for over 5 years. Pokemon is my favorite series next to Fire Emblem, which has yet to make its foray onto Death Battle. Growing up on Nintendo with Pokemon Diamond as my first game, eventually getting around to Smash and seeing Pokemon crossover with Mario and Sonic, two other childhood heroes of mine. And those two fighting was my first Death Battle. But my broader point is that experience got me into crossovers, eventually leading me down the rabbit hole with Marvel vs. Capcom. But there's another big end besides Nintendo, in Nickelodeon. Gotta love my SpongeBob and Avatar. Anyone remember Clash of the Nicktoons? True first versus show. But Nicktoons also exposed me to some original anime popular in the West, like Dragon Ball Z, the Kai edition, Yu-Gi-Oh! And Digimon. And I think you know where this is going. For years, my favorite episode of the show has been Pokemon vs. Digimon. Being two of my favorite series of all time, I was very curious how they were going to cover Red, who is, if I recall correctly, Death Battle's first true entirely silent player-decided protagonist. And much like his title in-game, they did so masterfully, basing him off his appearance in Pokemon Origins, while using supplementary sources to pinpoint how powerful Charizard is. As much as I like Pokemon Adventures, Red being with Charizard and not Venusaur is the right option. Tai has also done really well too, bringing up a lot of niche and weird stuff in the Digimon series. I remember the ending of Digimon 02 really bothering me as a kid with how weird it was, in the best way. Maybe one too many "what were they on, drugs" jokes, but it's Digimon's first time on the show. The fight, while it does show its age, still gets me going every time. The action and dynamic between the trainers and their partners is spot on. The music is outstanding. I get chills every time Uncontrollable comes on at the climax. And with Nate Wants to Battle's mashup of both series' main themes. Nate himself also did a pretty good job as Red, and while Todd Haberkorn doesn't exactly sound like Tai, it's a very distinct voice to replicate. And he gets the character's energy and spirit across well. But Xander Mobus steals the show as Agumon in all of his forms. The whole animation feels like a love letter to both series, with attacks being telegraphed and called out by the trainer and tamer. It also shows how far both series have come. A lot of people who don't know Digimon go as far as to call it a knockoff of Pokemon, when both series are very distinct and very different. If anything, both influenced each other into what they have become today, with things like Mega Evolution and the Western characterization of Tai. With Charizard X fighting Wargreymon, seeing the literal evolution of both characters is kind of poetic in a way. Yeah, there's one bad line that's kind of infamous in the end analysis, but that's not enough to ruin an episode for me. I know Digimon isn't the most popular franchise, so I can understand people being mad that Charizard died. He is a popular character, but I think they could have gone even farther with the death like they originally planned. If Red got his final line, that would have broken me. The finishing blow we did get, though, was really great. Of all characters in Death Battle to have the most impactful DBZ Ki Blast on the show, I'm glad it was a Digimon. Seeing both of them use a ton of different attacks and strategize around the other is just perfect. Death Battle is at its best when it feels like the two series involved are treated as labors of love. Series that have been dormant for years. Series that I don't even know about, but you can tell just all the love and care that got put into them. Make for some of my favorite episodes of the whole series. But Pokemon vs. Digimon is my favorite. As a kid, I wanted nothing more than to see these two series face off. Pokemon vs. Digimon is my favorite episode. I would love to see even more fights between the two series. They tried that with Lucario vs. Renamon, but there's so many other possibilities. Could I really ask for more though? Well, maybe Black Adam vs. Apocalypse is literally right.
Hey, thanks for watching this episode of Scene Selection. If you enjoyed it, make sure you support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/crossoverx. Happy 10th anniversary Death Battle. Thank you for changing our lives and bringing us all together by killing off our favorite characters and also making our favorite characters kill other people. Here's to another 10 years of excitement and excruciating pain.